of everybody's time, especially considering that this is a holiday weekend. And I just greatly appreciate everybody who's able to join us. And Brandon, you especially, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just a little bit of context for you, Brandon, before we dive into some of the questions. We are really trying to think outside of the box here with doing SURP at a distance, as you know, and we've been welcoming folks to share insights about their professional experiences as a way for us to kind of make up for what we would have been able to do in person. So thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you that are on the call with us, Dr. Brandon Schwab, he is the Associate Provost at Western Carolina for Academic Affairs and Associate Professor of Geology. And so, Brandon, what I'd love to do is just go ahead and dive right into our questions. And so first question that I've been asking everybody is to tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you originally from, and where did you go to school, and how did you end up in the position as Associate Provost here at Western Carolina?
Well, ever since I was a baby, I wanted to be Associate Provost. No, not. I grew up in rural Ohio, and one of three boys to my parents. Grew up in tromping around the woods and playing in the creek and things like that. I'm the first in my family to go to college, so first gen student. I've always kind of admired scientists and how they were portrayed in movies and things like that, and so I had an interest in being a scientist, whatever that meant. Without really necessarily knowing what that meant. There was always an expectation that I would go to college, but I didn't have any kind of models or mentors to help me along that path. But eventually got in. I thought maybe I'll be a biologist, but when I got to biology in high school, I really didn't enjoy it. And that was probably more the way it was presented at that time than what it could have been. But I had an earth science class and enjoyed that, and actually thought, well, I'm going to major in geology going into school. Not many geologists start as geology majors as freshmen in college. They usually happen upon that later on. But stumbled my way through 3 different institutions in 3 different states in 3 different years because I didn't necessarily know what I was going to be doing. I had a mentor in high school in Massachusetts. I moved with my family my senior year, and a marine scientist that really helped me think about what might be next. So I picked the University of Arizona to study geological oceanography. Makes a lot of sense, right? Tucson, Arizona, nowhere near the ocean. Anyway, ultimately ended up at University of North Carolina, Wilmington on the coast here, and finished my degree and wanted to get out west as a geologist. Went to the University of Oregon for graduate school. Again, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I thought I was going to be work in the field as a structural geologist, and I ended up working in the lab making rocks. A whole field of geology I didn't know existed, but connected with a mentor there that really turned me on to something new, and it was fabulous. Ultimately earned my PhD at the University of Oregon, and again, kind of stumbling along, went to a one-year lecture position at Humboldt State University in Northern California. That turned into a tenure track position, went up the ranks to be department head, and ultimately started to think more broadly and what I wanted to do to
Brandon, you've frozen just a bit. Brandon, can you hear us? Well, this is new. Oh, okay. I would imagine he's going to log back in just a second. We'll give it a minute.
Did any of you know you could make rocks in a lab?
I had no idea.
I've actually heard Brandon say that before. It requires very high temperatures. I remember him talking about, like, I don't know, like temperatures like beyond your imagination. And you can do that in the lab. I'm like, how do you do that in a lab without melting the lab? Like, I don't.
I'd love to see this done. I'd love to see what a lab grown rock would be like. I guess it would be something like the diamonds they make now.
Yeah, my sister's a geologist, and my half sister, she's over in Texas, and she knows all kinds of cool tricks and stuff. And I don't know if you've ever heard of bismuth, but that's like entirely like lab created. And I am not in any way a geology expert, but it's so cool. It kind of looks like somebody like 3D printed it, and it's all rainbow colors, and it's so cool. But it's called bismuth, and it's really neat looking. But yep, they make that stuff in labs.
So, Kat, maybe you know what do they use these for?
What do they use the rocks for?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. I think they do like an analysis of what's actually in them, and then they can test like different hardness scales and stuff. But I don't know. That's not my field at all.
Brandon, can you hear us? Okay.
You see me again?
We gotcha.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, it's classic Zoom. But we were carrying on in your brief absence, talking more about the interest of making rocks in the lab. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was neat. So used some big presses and equipment to simulate high pressure, high temperature conditions in the Earth's crust and upper mantle. And I built a lab for undergraduate research at Humboldt State University. I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical to the Smithsonian, help build a lab there. So it was a really fun former part of my life.
Well, Brandon, I think that actually leads us right into our question that we have from Matt. He wanted to know if you have a little time just to tell us a little bit more about your work as a geologist. And he's very curious, and we haven't mentioned this part of your job yet, but your relationship with Highlands Biological Station.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take a minute to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In terms of my my geology life, again, I mentioned I thought I was going to be a field geologist, and that was partly related to my work as an undergraduate student, tromping around the woods in central and eastern North Carolina doing field geology. Got to Oregon and realized this whole new aspect of lab work in a different way, and simulating conditions that nobody can ever get to was pretty exciting. Also got to use some really cool tools like scanning electron microscopes and electron microprobes and X-ray diffractometers. And so I always liked tinkering and tools and building models, and the experiments that we would do would be on really, really small samples, because if you think about processes in the earth, they take millions of years or hundreds of millions of years, and we don't have that much time as humans. And so you can kind of speed up the kinetics of things by working on really small fine grain minerals and tiny little capsules and cool stuff like that. Be happy to come to my office someday when we're all allowed to be on campus, and I'll show you what those things look like.
Oh, very cool. Well, I think it's surprising that you talk about your work in a lab, working with the small samples. It's kind of almost counterintuitive for me, at least, being totally non-knowledgeable about your area, I'd think that you would be doing things on the big scale because of kind of what you're tasked with doing, right?
Yeah.
Kind of
And
understanding those long-term processes of Earth.
that's right. And so I would climb up a volcano in Northern California, Lassen Peak, to collect rock samples and then take those rocks apart into separate minerals and then crush those and do high pressure experiments on tiny bits. So it is counterintuitive operating at these different scales, both in size and in time. But that's some of what geologists do, is think in those ways. In terms of Highlands Biological Station, that's one of my responsibility areas on campus, in part because I have a science background, and that organization is like a mini campus, right? There's dorms, there's places to cook food, there's research labs, and great access to field sites. And so it's like a mini campus. And so because of the range of things that happen there, it reports to a higher level area of the university. And because I like science and am a scientist, I think it was handed to me when I came into the office.
Well, for the students here joining us, had we been able to meet in person, we would have taken a field trip to Highlands Biological Station. That's one of the spots we like to bring our students to every year. And it is truly amazing. The diversity, the ecological diversity that exists at Highlands Biological Station, that area, is so unique. With a lot of the ecological things, you don't find them anywhere else on Earth. So students, if you ever get the opportunity, you can go to Highlands Biological Station. You can tour the grounds there anytime. It is open to the public, and it's definitely worth the visit. And so Brandon, let's shift a little bit into what I think we really want to get to the heart of today, and that is just talking a little bit about teamwork and collaboration, mentoring and leadership. So our students would have had the opportunity to do some mentoring this summer had we not been in the COVID crisis with our incoming freshmen in the Summer Scholars Program. And so I'd love to be able to fill that void a little bit with your perspectives on mentoring. Do you have any experiences in your time as an undergraduate, as a graduate, that stood out to you in that realm of mentoring? For instance, anything that was most impactful to you or meant the most to you in a mentoring experience?
Yeah, good question. I would say that mentoring is what got me on the path that I'm on. From initially as an undergraduate doing field research, showing up at a professor's office doorway and saying, what can I do? What can I learn? And having the opportunity to become a field partner and learn that aspect of geology, and then be invited to, by showing up, work in a rock preparation lab as an undergraduate. I did the same kind of thing in graduate school. I showed up to the professor's lab and said, you know what can I do? I want to learn what's going on in here. And he connected me with a PhD student, and so I just basically volunteered for a period of time, and eventually he took me on as a PhD student. So that kind of thing had happened repeatedly over my career. And then as a professional outside of geology now, I've had some great mentors with an organization that's called Project Kaleidoscope, that really works toward leadership development for especially STEM faculty. And I've been part of that group for several years now, and continue to keep close relationships with a couple of mentors from that I had in that program, and now I serve as a mentor to others.
So, you know, I'm going to call out Mateo on this. Mateo, these are kind of your line of questions that you posted that you wanted to hear from Brandon about. But it sounds like you still interact with your mentors from the past. Is that correct?
Some of them very much so, yes.
And so how do you think our students should be interacting with their faculty mentors now so that they get the most out of that experience and can take that with them well beyond the bounds of Western Carolina?
Good question. I think all of these questions you gave me are really good. So kudos to the authors. I think something that I've mentioned previously is to show up, to be there. And that goes a long way in building these relationships. When you have an opportunity, say yes to it. Almost no matter what it is, you can gain from it if you enter it with an open mind and explore what those opportunities really are. Do what you say you'll do. If you say I'll take care of this, or I'll do this task in the lab or in the field or prep for this discussion, do it and be ready to present things when it's time. And something that I didn't do enough of early on is to ask questions. Explore things, ask questions. I didn't do enough of that because I think I was afraid of looking dumb or sounding silly or uninformed, and feeling a sense of kind of imposter syndrome, almost like, well, I don't necessarily belong here, even though as a white male, I look like I belong on a college campus or a lab based on, stereotypes, but I didn't necessarily feel that way. And so I didn't ask enough questions early on, and I could have gotten farther faster, I think, had I done that. It's really silly to think that I was supposed to know everything, or even now that I'm supposed to know everything, because I don't. And the only way to learn is to really interrogate what you don't know.
I'm so glad that you brought that point up. I feel that in my work too. That hesitancy to ask questions in fear of what somebody else might think of you. And I love how you phrased that kind of interrogation of the unknown. That's where the good stuff comes from, that good learning. And so I'm just so glad that you brought that up. So just a kind of aside on that, did a mentor did you figure that out on your own, or did you finally have a mentor say, you need to ask questions, you need to talk through this?
Great question. And I want to go back to having the students be mentors to others. Some important things that allow that to happen. But the quick answer is no, I didn't do it alone. It was really through mentorship and coaching from others, and interrogating why I would feel that I should know everything, or that I should be worried about looking dumb. And that's a process. It's a kind of a reflective process of inquiry and conversation, and you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable to explore that. And it took me a long time to get there, and still I have to deal with that from time to time, but I've learned that it's okay, and there's people around me that are happy to talk and to be supportive, and that they are also feeling the same way. Everybody has this to some extent. So I think as you become mentors to others, I think it's what worked for me, or what helped me kind of break through, was that I found mentors that really took the time and were available to me, and that really were supportive and sincerely wanted me to succeed. And I think as you have opportunities in the future to mentor others, to think about those aspects, and also think about what would you need from someone if you were to be seeking mentorship, and then how would you present those traits to others.
I love that pass it on, that pay it forward mentality of mentoring. I think that is so crucial. And so let's shift a little bit into the realm of professional collaboration. And I'm going to cite Kat here. She had some really great questions about this, but I'd love to know, what does it mean to you, and how much of your work is teamwork and collaboration?
Yeah. I can't think of a thing I do that is all on my own. From the most mundane things of trying to get a meeting scheduled, to needing to change a policy on campus and having to think system, as a system thinker, is, okay, if we change this lever here, how does that cascade, and who do we need to talk to understand the implications of something like that, all the way to something a little bit more interesting would be a recent collaboration that you and I were part of, Clue, in writing a multi-institutional NSF grant proposal that involved many people and grew over time, and Jill played a important role in review and feedback to that. So that could not happen by any one individual, and it's better for it because of the diverse experiences and perspectives and thoughts that made the whole better than it would have been singularly.
Yeah, and I think that we have this, and I don't know where this comes from. I guess, you know, the cultural story of being an American maybe, but you know, real progress, I don't think ever happens in isolation, and you know, no man or woman is an island. And I think that in our new reality, I think that that's starting to shine through even more, if people hadn't really had that awareness previously. But I think that one thing that I truly appreciate in the fact that when I get to work with you, you are my supervisor, that you maintain a really strong sense of support and approachability. And this stems from Kat's question. So how do you prepare to be a supervisor and maintain support and approachability?
Good one.
I don't know if we can answer that. I don't know.
I think what I try to do with everyone I work with is to maintain an openness to other people's ideas, try to have really clear communication and present the opportunity for others to communicate with me, try to set that baseline of, you know, whatever you want to say to me is okay, and I want to hear what you have to say, and to create that space and understanding up front. So it's really about building trust, right? You have to be able to trust the people you work with, whether it's in a supervisory role or as a collaborative group, and that takes some intentionality and time and effort to build that. But I think it's so important.
I'm glad that you brought that up. My mom used to always tell me, Clue, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I used to get really frustrated when she told me that, but it has just rung so true in my life, and what you say in being able to establish trust with the folks that you're collaborating with. It is all about hearing. It is all about listening first, and then being able to kind of percolate on that, and then offer your facts and opinions. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that I can go back to my mom too and tell her that her advice was sound on that.
It was, and I think another thing is that you have to be willing to give some things up, right? There may be better ideas than what you had it preconceived in your head that you have to allow to go to the wayside to move to something better. So there's a giving up some control sometimes is necessary.
Oh, and that is very difficult to do. I mean, for somebody like me, that is always the challenge, is giving up that control and having a little faith in others and their ideas too. I'm a bit stubborn on that, as I get that from my dad, I think. Tell me, I'd love to talk, this leads into our conversation about leadership. So I'd love to know what you think it means to be a leader, and who do you think is a great role model? I mean, pick anybody out of the universe. Who is a leader that you think exemplifies those best qualities?
Well, I prescribe to a model of leadership called servant leadership, and my philosophy around it is, not serving myself, but serving others and working toward the greater good. And that's really why, or how I approach things. And at least I hope I'm approaching that most of the time. Leadership's really about bringing people together to accomplish a goal. I think being able to convey a vision, whether it's your own or others, and whether it's big or small, is really important, and to building inspiration to others to achieve those things. And I do it in a very collaborative way, I believe, and I think humility is essential, and that goes back to the vulnerability piece of being okay to make mistakes or to fail forward. It's really important. And I think, again, it comes back to being a really clear communicator and transparent in decision making. Looking for others' input on things. It doesn't mean that any one person's desire is what is realized, but to give everybody the opportunity to contribute if they choose to. In terms of a model of, I think, a incredible leader was Dr. David Belcher, who was the chancellor of Western Carolina University, and he died a couple years ago now. He was almost a singular character. He was incredibly inspirational. He was incredibly driven. He was a connector. There's many stories about him, and anyone that met him felt like they were his best friend. And he had that ability with every single person. And he was tireless. So I look at him as just an incredible model, and not a model that I could be. His personality was very different from mine, and it would be a mistake for me to try to replicate who he was. And that's also, I think, a really important lesson, is that that's okay. There's not one type of leader. And something that we talk a lot about in this project Kaleidoscope that I mentioned earlier is there's big L leaders and little L leaders. And leadership doesn't always come with a title, right? It's not always a position. You may not have the title of associate provost, but you're a leader on the university campus. So there's not one style, one type. but sometimes the situation is such that you may play a role as a big L leader, or you may play a role as a little L leader, and titles almost don't matter in most circumstances.
Well, I think that brings us to a question that I think I would have challenge answering. So maybe I'll see what you can do with it. But how do you transition from a position where you're a team member to a team leader, or right, you're talking about that big L, little L? How do you get into those positions where you're leading?
Yeah, I think that comes in part with time and practice, but an important part of leadership is looking at the big picture of what needs to be done, whether that's a small goal or a really large goal, and then to recognize what has to happen and bring the people together to make it happen. And that doesn't mean doing it all. It doesn't mean, oh, I see all these things that have to happen, so I'm going to do them and get it done. Now, occasionally that does happen or need to happen, but it's not about control again. It's about bringing others together to achieve something bigger. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what leadership is. And so it comes with thinking about the big picture, looking for these opportunities and stepping up, whether you have the title or not.
And I love that you've brought this up now a couple times in our conversation, this quality of leadership. It is, if I may take kind of that psychological phenomenon, the internal versus the external locus of control, it is setting up the foundations to be more external, and that connecting experience and interacting, I think, is where we can find the sweet stuff of transitioning from somebody who's just participating and going through an experience to somebody who is big L, little L, leading with an experience. And so with that, Brandon, it is 10:33, and we got a little disconnected there. So I hope I can buy just a little bit of those minutes back that we got disconnected. And
I'll put it on the
okay, I want to ask one more question, and then hand it over to our students who I think have some really great questions, and I think some chat questions that are coming up. So can you share any experience, no naming names, when you've had a team fall apart, that collaborative element fall apart, and how did you overcome that challenge?
I'll give you two examples. One from that didn't go quite, the end result wasn't what I would hope, right? And this was when I was a department head, and we were doing, actually it was, I'm trying to think, I may not have been a department head at that time, but maybe I was, or maybe I wasn't, it doesn't really matter. We were doing a big curriculum reform for our department. And if you think about a program or a major that you have on campus, and think about all the classes that you have to take as part of that, there's a lot of moving pieces, and you have to think systematically about it. So there's a lot to it. And I had a colleague that had promised to take on a chunk of that and was going to do it, and then didn't do it, and then reacted very emotionally about all that they had to do, and how could I be asking them to do this when they had already volunteered to do it. And I responded emotionally to that and said, okay, fine, I'll just do it. And instead, what I should have done was to step back at that moment when my blood pressure was up, and I was acting emotionally and matching the energy. I should have stepped back and said, you know what, I can't talk about this right now. We'll address this later. And then gotten clear and approached it in a more constructive way. so I learned from that. I haven't done that again since. Another example is when a team is, maybe not that it's not working right because of internal reasons, but because of external. Maybe the team is broken apart in some way. And that can be a really emotional thing for everyone, right? Especially if you're working closely for a long period of time, and you lose someone from that team, it's hard. And so in that case, to recover, really had to go through a grieving process, and to go through all those emotional steps of what that meant. You change any one team member and you change the dynamics of a team. And so if you have a team where the dynamics and that's changed, you have to adjust. So a critical piece that wasn't able to touch on earlier, but I think for leading others, you have to know and lead yourself first. You need to know what it is, what are your triggers or emotional things that trigger emotional responses in you. How do you communicate with others and know what the communication you need to be successful? And then how do you approach that for someone else? So I might need to communicate with Clue in a different way than I would another colleague that I work with on campus in order to achieve a goal that I want. And I'm not going to change Clue, right? I can only change myself. So if I know myself and what I need and how I approach a default situation, then I can prepare to have a conversation with Clue differently than I would with someone else. So you bring in a new team member and you've got to figure that out. Have to figure that other person out. You're not going to be able to change them. You can only change yourself. So with that, then you can go through that process of being transparent and communicative and to rebuild that trust and collaboration to reestablish that change team.
I think what you're saying too goes back to some of the themes that we've talked about through this program with our other interviewees. It's that mindfulness and just having your eyes wide open going into something and who you're collaborating with, how you're collaborating with them. And without that mindfulness, without that awareness, you're not going to be as successful in your collaborative efforts. And so I'm so glad that you did bring that up, because I think that ties very nicely into some of the themes we've talked about over the past few weeks. So with that time, I'd love to hand this over to our students now. And Jill, if it's okay with you, maybe you could, as you have so graciously in the past, to kind of manage any questions that have come up on chat. And as Jill is doing that, y'all, I'd love if anybody wants to unmute and show a face if able to ask a question of Brandon. That would be great too.
So my internet has gone completely wonky, and every time it glitches, I lose the chat. So you guys are going to have to help me, okay? One thing, Brandon, I think the students were really interested in talking about was the idea that you're a first-gen student and how you have had to navigate your career as a first-gen student. So maybe you could just talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, happy to. I think a big part of it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, was that I didn't ask enough questions early on. And if there are first gen students, or you know of any, or maybe you're not a first gen student but are feeling hesitant to ask questions, don't. That's why you're here. And I would encourage it. And I encourage it to ask questions of your mentor for SURP, your professors, other staff and administrators on campus. They really want to hear from you, and don't be afraid to appear that you don't know something, because you're not supposed to know everything. And that's why we are all here at the university, is to support you. So it's sometimes it takes going up to a doorway and taking a deep breath and before you step in, and then feel okay to ask a question, no matter what it is. The other, I think, important thing that I came to realize was that even though I felt maybe alone or singular in feeling that way, I know now that that's not the case. Everybody has, if they're a well put together human and have any reflective bone in their body, everybody has a sense of uncertainty sometimes and self-doubt. And I had to recognize that to know that it was okay for me to feel that way, and then to move forward. You don't have to go through any of this alone. And ultimately you can't. We need each other. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with the crisis that we're in now, and a lot of social isolation and physical separation is deleterious to people's mental health. And so we need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other and be supportive. And an aspect of SURP that is so great is that you are a community here and have a network and a support net for each other, not just for this couple months during the summer, but onward.
And if I may chime in on that one too, you know, we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks the power of our acquaintances and building up that capacity of social power, right? That acquaintances over the long term are where we can find a lot of opportunity, and just keeping a pulse on and keeping connected with those acquaintances will serve you best in the long run. All right, other questions from students?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So from looking at your background, it looks like your bachelor's degree and your PhD and pretty much all of your education was centered around geology. Mm-hmm. And now your job isn't directly related to geology. It's more of an administration type office job. Is that just completely counter to whatever plan you had while you were going through school, or did you have a plan? Like, is this something that you had thought of? Like, I'm going to study the earth, but then I'm going to, get a job dealing with people. Or did you think you were going to be a geologist for years and years and years and had this set plan and then just decided to change it?
Great question. I think in part I did geology because I didn't want to deal with people, right? I could handle rocks. People were more complex. So no, I never went into higher ed thinking about, I want to be an administrator someday. Provost was. Maybe I still don't. But what happened for me over time was, as I got more experience and became more involved with broader campus issues. At first it was at a department level, and then to the college and beyond. I started to see the bigger picture for what the institutions do, and saw ways that I thought I had some skills that could help move things forward. I think that was part, I hadn't thought about this before, but I think this is an example of what I mentioned earlier about leadership, of seeing the bigger picture and the parts and knowing what needed to happen and stepping forward to try to bring people together to do that. And I started to realize I had at least some aptitude for that, and saw a need for it to happen. And so I started to say yes to some of those opportunities that came about.
Yeah, Brandon, maybe you could just connect that to the idea of research, that, you know, as a researcher, you learn to problem solve, and then how generally applicable is that later in your life?
That's great. I think for me, I had to go through a sense of not just feeling about what am I giving up to make a transition like I did to administration, but what would I gain? And thinking about, okay, I spent years and years and hours studying and spending time in the lab and out in the field. And I put all this effort into learning geology, which I rarely think about a mineral on a given day, when I used to think about minerals every single day. But what did I gain? I gained skills at looking at complex data and making inferences without knowing everything. So pulling information together where I can to find or to come up with a hypothesis or a conclusion. How do I present that information in a way that makes sense to others? How can I think big picture, both in scale of geography or time or whatever it may be? How do I look at the Earth as a system, and how do I look at the university as a system? So the things around finding information, making hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, presenting the results of those thoughts, and thinking in the big picture and over longer period of time. All of those things I learned as a researcher and a geologist, and I apply it every single day as an administrator. But never, when I entered college, did I think that that's where I would end up.
Well, I think that that's patternistic of what we've talked about with other people, that it's not a straight shot. Point A to point B, it's windy and curvy and full of the unexpected. But if you can hold on to those skills and those experiences that have really informed you on how to problem solve, boom, you can handle that curve and that windy path much more intuitively and with greater success.
And sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's exhilarating and exciting, but it all, if you're open to it, it can lead to a good place.
Well, and I think with the time that we have, we can ask one more question. Do we have anybody who wants to ask a question that hasn't had an opportunity?
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know you touched on this a little bit about like what you do when you're working with people and they're not like giving their all, and you gave some examples with like people in like the adult working world. But what about when you were in college and like the students you were working with like weren't like giving their all and kind of slacking off, and you felt like you were like, did you have an experience where you were like the only person that was contributing and everyone just kind of laid back and was like, all right, you got it, and then it just felt like it was so overwhelming, you know? Have you had that experience, and like how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that's tough. You know, group projects in classes, I would say oftentimes are not reflective of what collaboration and teamwork is like in the quote unquote real world. And a big part of that is that they're not structured the same way as groups in later on. And that's because oftentimes the groups are kind of just put together in ad hoc kind of way, okay, the four of you over there, you're going to work together on this project. And there's the pre-work that I think needs to be done to assemble the best team and to build that trust and the responsibility that I kind of referred to a little bit early on. So that can happen. So I would encourage you, if you're in a group, in a class where maybe that didn't happen, that there wasn't an intentionality in putting a team together for a project, is to take a little bit of time before diving in and come to kind of a common consensus and understanding of what the expectations are for your group, and say, okay, we know we need to accomplish this by such and such time. Let's step back and look at how we're going to get there and who's going to be responsible for what pieces, and putting in that and getting the commitment from everyone, I think can help alleviate, maybe not 100% of the time, but it can help alleviate those issues where you feel like you're the one that needs to carry all the weight. Nobody else is contributing. So to make that agreement up front, and perhaps communicate that to your professor, that this is what we've agreed to, and this is what we're gonna do. So if there's a piece that's missing, right now what we've agreed to, and I think that can help, and that happens in the professional world now too. But the advantage that we have, Clue and Jill and myself have in our roles, is we have the opportunity more often to construct teams in an intentional way and look at the skill set that people bring and the strengths, and try to in the diversity of people and thought and ideas to make the team better from the beginning. So it gets better.
And if I can, I would add too that what seems to oftentimes be missing in the class is for students to find that affiliation with the work that they're doing. And in the real world, when you are forming collaborative teams and collaborating with other professionals, oftentimes that is a key piece of the success of that team, is that everybody has the buy-in, everybody is affiliated with the project, and I mean, if I can be colloquial, has a little bit of their heart and soul in it. And I don't think that you can maybe duplicate that all the time in the classroom when you're an undergraduate. So I would say that that's one of the pieces that I find to be very different from when I was in school versus in the real world. All right, any other questions before we let Brandon go and enjoy his holiday?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go for it, Justin.
I was actually curious, in your background it said that you are a really experienced grant writer. And as somebody who has tried to write a grant and got rejected for that grant, I'm just curious if you had any advice for, maybe resources for learning better grant writing or anything in that general area.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my first NSF proposal, it took me 3 times to get it. So I think one big piece of advice, and my PhD advisor used this line often, is keep going, keep trying. Most grant agencies and the science ones in particular, the success rate is maybe in the 20% or 30% range. And so know that you're not going to be successful every time. And in terms of resources and support, yes, they are available. Your faculty mentors and faculty on campus are are important mentors. If you're going for external grants, the Office of Research Administration has great support in helping to find agencies for funding, and would also be more than happy to help support competitive proposals and to put together budgets that make sense and all of those things that are important in grant writing. So I would just say, don't lose faith. Keep going, and ask questions of faculty and the support offices on campus to help you get there. Well, I hope I've answered some questions that were asked.
You
Get
sure
all
did.
the points. If I missed anything, let me know.
We certainly will, and I hope it will be okay if we have any of these students that would like to follow up with you. I'd love to provide them your email address so that they might be able to network with you down the road a bit.
Absolutely, very, very happy to do that. And if you're on campus someday when we're allowed to be there, I'm just on the 5th floor in the ugly Salt Lick building, so come on by.
Well, Brandon, again, thank you so much for your time and joining us on this holiday. Really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Good luck with your project. You have a great weekend.